Ren is a beer industry veteran. You might know Ren as an advocate and industry expert, consultant, does a lot of conversations with us and our peers, media about the work that Ren does. You can find Ren on Beer Diversity, also founder of Do Better, Be Better. That is the long-winded version of the welcome for the night. But Ren, if you'd like to unmute yourself to join the conversation as well, thank you very much for being our guest. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Hey, friends. I see a bunch of people I know. This is awesome. Thanks for coming and hanging out.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to pick your brain. And if anybody has questions you would like to ask, you did not ask ahead of time, feel free to put them in the chat box. I've got them queued up as well. You can send them to me directly, and I'm happy to ask them anonymously if you prefer to not have it asked publicly yourself or with your name. So Ren, one of the things that I always like to do when we talk to people who talk to media a lot is I love to talk about talking. Because this is always a good place where, we are on one side of interviews all the time, and it's so rare we get to hear from people about their experiences being interviewed and things that might help us get better. So I do want to start there as someone who, I don't know, dozens does not feel correct. So I'll just say hundreds over the course of the last couple of years. What is it that you see or experience in interviews that maybe you, I don't know, think about that interviewers might be able to do better? What are the kinds of questions or experiences that might be able to help us when we think about interviewing?
I think depending on who you're talking to, obviously, if they've been around for a bit, do some homework. Just do some basic digging and have stuff. I've had a lot of interviews, even in the past few weeks, where people are like, tell me everything that you do. And it's like, really? That's a Google search. No one's going to want you to list it, or for me to just say for half an hour and you're like, cool, I'm going to take this piece and this piece. And sometimes it will happen, but it's also, what do you want to know? And what do you think is interesting? Because again, people are just like, oh, so you talk about diversity. Yep. And I talk about beer too. And I love fun questions. Obviously, Brian has submitted everyone who came in to listening to Nine Inch Nails because he asked me what my favorite song was, and that is my fault. You had to list that. So I love that kind of thing because people don't ask it. So ask something different to start, because the icebreakers are fun. I think that the people that I always want to talk to are the ones who continuously have a tidbit, or you've gone into my Instagram and seen something that isn't heavy, and it's, maybe it's a picture of my cats. I don't know. Just start with something that gets me relaxed, because when I'm sitting down to talk to someone, I'm, even if I know you, I'm still kind of that, I hope I say the right thing. So ease, right? It's the way that you sit down and you talk to your friend and you're like, hey, how was your day? And then get into all the big stuff. It's the same kind of thing. And I absolutely love it.
One of the things that I always try to feel out in those moments is that kind of breaking point where it goes from chit chat into, okay, and here's why we're talking, by the way. Is there something when you talk about icebreakers, just in terms of just, even if it's a little bit of rapport, just kind of opening up in a softer way, is there a point where you, as someone who gets interviewed, start thinking, okay, are we going to get into this now? Are you going to start asking me specific questions that I can answer?
Yeah, and I think that that's also your pre-work when you send an email to say, hey, can I talk to you? I want to talk about these kind of things. And so I know kind of what's coming. You don't have to be these are going to be my 8 questions, or these are going to be the things that happen, because we're human. You may say, I'm going to start here, but my answer suddenly takes you here. I know that's going to happen, but give me an idea of what I'm going to chat about. Because I've been pretty lucky. I deal with a lot of different sectors, and it's not just beer anymore. So give me a heads up about what brain I got to put in and what I've got to think about. Are we talking about wine? Are we going to talk about hospitality? Are we going to talk about education? It's because also inevitably you will ask for examples of things. Someone will say, oh, what brewery do you think is doing it really well? I am terrible on the spot. I'll be like, there's one brewery that I really love that does stuff, and then the second we get off the call, I'm like, there are like 40. I didn't prep for it, and people always assume that you're just going to know. And it's like, if I wasn't ready for it, I have no idea. And it's going to take me too long. And I'm like, forget it. Next question.
Well, spoiler alert, I have a whole bunch of questions that you're not prepared for. So
Yes.
is there a question, or are there questions that you feel like aren't asked enough?
How you doing? Like, it's pandemic, not great. Like, everything's a nightmare. Again, that can be part of the icebreaker, but it can also lead into the, like, what breaks your heart? What did you think that was going to work out really well that just didn't? And can we talk about how you think that it could have been improved?
Well, all right, we'll flip things now a little bit too. I think there are a host of ideas and topics and issues that we could speak about. And I'm going to do that thing that you hate, where I don't say specifically, because over the last 18 to 24 months, when there have been so many things to follow and reflect on and track, in the conversations that you've had, and this could be with media or in a consulting capacity, are there things that people are asking you? So I guess, from our perspective as reporters, this might be, hey, is there something that we're missing? Are there things that people are coming to you with over these last 18 to 24 months that have been maybe common or repetitive, in the things that people are curious about?
Which breweries are doing it right? And I always give the same answer. No one gets a gold star. They're all working on it, which is such a terrible line to give, to put in an article, because that, your reader is like, oh, great, it all sucks. Like, I think that if it's tailored a bit more to say, yes, no one gets a gold star, but who is putting in the effort, and who is in your eyes, or, who have you heard about that is doing things a little differently? And I don't get that question a lot. I just get, like, who's doing it right? What's right?
Yeah, how do we as the media follow up and do better about that? Because I think it's easy to fall into that trap. And certainly, in all kinds of storytelling, I've been guilty of having the examples as that are meant to be kind of the reflection of everybody else. Is there a way that we can maybe be more aware and do better about trying to identify things from that perspective, that nobody does get a gold star?
I think that it's, pinpointed a bit more, because that question about, like, who's doing it right, I mean, it always starts with, like, oh, well, you're in Canada, but you've traveled. Like, who do you think globally is doing it right? And it's like, I haven't traveled in like 3 years, and I don't go to breweries. So, like, I'm just looking online. So ask me, like, okay, you're in Kitchener. Who do you think that's local that is doing things that, that are different? Or do you think that they're supporting the community in ways that others should emulate? Like, make it to my space, because inevitably I'll be like, oh, you've told me where you are, and I have that idea and kind of that moment to think about it, to, like, relate it, so people aren't like, I don't even know where Kitchener is. But then I can say, oh, you know what? I was at Fresh Fest, and I met these people, and I was at this spot in the States, and this was kind of that piece that reminded me of what's happening here.
When people have asked you about that kind of thing, when it's been, tell me who's doing it well, or who do you see doing well, do you ever get a follow-up? So, if people are asking whether it's accessibility or Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ plus, when they're seeking that answer in the moment, is there any, I guess, what is happening after the fact, if it does, in terms of what you're seeing happening with people following up with you, or just exploring something beyond?
It's a rarity. And it's just that, like, I grab the info and I'll just take it, and then it lives in a spot for years, and people take that at face value. And it can be that, one of those breweries is actually, like, leveled up, and they're doing it even better, and have influenced these, and these folks wouldn't be on my list now. But yeah, there isn't a lot of follow-up that I see, because people are reaching out to me because something's on fire, right? Like, they're like, hey, this terrible thing happened, let's talk to Ren. So I don't get to be like, hey, 6 months ago, remember these guys, they've done all these things now. No, I have to be like, these people kill puppies, they're terrible, and maybe one day they'll be reformed, and, like, that's it.
Mm. Maybe in that vein, to give a little bit of extra context of what you're up to right now, I just saw today, and it was announced just days ago, you'll be doing work with BrewDog. And of course, for those of you who haven't followed stories of the last couple of weeks, BrewDog has kind of been at the center of an employee and former employee-led campaign to highlight disparities and challenges that employees had working there. Ren, forgive me, because I don't know if I saw a specific title that was provided in terms of your relationship aside from a diversity specialist. So could you just give a little context about what you'll be doing in your involvement with what's going on with BrewDog?
And it's funny that I gave the example of puppies and then followed up with BrewDog. So it's fresh. It's a really fresh partnership. And at this point, I'm going over everything. So I've asked them, if I start as an employee, what do I get, and what is my training, and what's my support? And really, the point of doing it is to really establish benchmarks and establish documentation, and how do we hold people accountable for what they're doing, because right now it doesn't read like there's a lot of accountability. So they are trying to move a little faster with it, but I know it won't go as fast as they hope, because this is an evolution, right? It's got to keep going. So yeah, it's still pretty fresh. I did see a title get thrown out. I don't remember what it was, because they also didn't tell me it went public, and I got tagged in a LinkedIn article. And so I was like, oh, I guess people know. And then I went and Googled myself and found that I was mentioned in two articles. So, we're off to that start. But it's been it's been good conversations. But right now it's a lot of fact finding.
What is that like when you find out news about yourself on Google?
It happens a lot. So it's not just like Brewdog did it. A lot of breweries that I work with get so hyped up about it that they're just like, we got to get some news out and tell people what we're doing. And they forget to be like, hey, your name's going to show up somewhere, which is like, whatever, it could be worse. But yeah, it's quite jarring. I mean, I put on Twitter, I was like, weird to see my name pop up in the UK news. At least they spelled my name right. Like, so it's, yeah, I mean, it happens.
Yeah, this one of the things I was curious to hear from you is you've talked in the past about this idea of disruption. And I guess in a way, you as an advocate and someone who does this as in a consultancy and advisory role, there is certainly an amount of disruption that, when you go in a situation like this to try to, I guess, bring things around a little bit. And I was kind of wrestling with this in my head because thinking about this idea of disruption when it comes to advocacy, that can often be a natural extension of advocacy work itself. Whereas for journalists, like there's a firewall that we very much purposely put there so we can write about advocacy. There are certainly kinds of storytelling that help to promote ideas of advocacy, but it's not done in that same way. The traditional journalism wouldn't be that. So I was curious, where this balance might be able to exist, both when we have a need more than ever, perhaps with broadly, but even just an industry coverage to showcase this kind of what's going on behind the scenes, the stories of those affected, but not go to this maybe subjective disruption place that might carry us too far, if there is an easy balance that can exist there.
Yeah, and I think that depending on who I'm talking to, I will tailor some of that. If it's alternative press, then I know that I can go nuts. But if it's a national newspaper, like, I'm gonna be like pretty much in my lane. But I can say that my goal then is to change how people think or help them look at things a little differently. Which, I mean, if you know me, then you read into it and you're like, oh, wait, there it is. But I think that's also the thing. Like, if you're talking to someone, kind of let them know where this is going to show up, because you don't want someone to present themselves as like this absolute anarchist when really they're just getting passionate about it because they want to talk about what they do. And, like down with the man, I gotta burn some buildings. And, they're like, ha ha ha. And like, you can't translate that into an article. So I think that also giving the heads up and saying like, this is a national piece, or this is a whatever, and you can kind of go this far with it and make sure that that they understand, and hopefully they will tailor some of their words, not all of it. There are ways to tailor that message that it still gets the same pieces out.
Could you explain what like alternate weekly anarchist Ren is versus mainstream Ren? Like what is the difference there that what you're flipping on and off?
I think like part of it for me is like, if I'm talking about Canada, inevitably someone's like, oh, Canadians are so nice. And I'm like, nah, man, we're going to stab you as we look at you, say sorry, and steal your car. And then, then I'll get into like the problems that we have with Indigenous peoples and how we're terrible and like we're finding bodies. And like, I'll take it into these like deep pieces and be like, these are what our problems are. And like, we got to stop pointing at the States being like, at least we're not like them. But if it's in a good newspaper, I'd be like, hey, I question the use of language and wonder how we can convey these things that are more encompassing and more inclusive. And it's kind of that like the anarchy part is like, we suck. and here are the things that we need to work on. And it affects beer and it affects alcohol and it affects society. And I think that, I'll take it a little darker. But I mean, I've done it on panels too. So I'm just like,
is this dependent then on just the level of understanding or interest from the audience itself?
Yeah, I mean, there's some articles just kind of like human interest. And it's, like you created a job for yourself. Like, what's that like? And what was the piece that sent you on this journey to do these things versus, Brewdog, how are you taking that, or other problematic breweries that I've worked with that, like they've had these bad things happen. Like, let's talk about that. So I think that you still have some of that human interest piece in there because you give the background and you tell, high level of who I am. Whereas the other one is like, Ren loves kittens and tattoos and loves talking about inclusion. And it's a much softer piece.
Why is it that you like talking about inclusion so much?
Because I think that people are scared of it. And I think that people are also scared of talking about diversity. And I'm just tired of people saying like, I can't do it. And it's like, you can do it. And here's how I think you can do it. My background is corporate. Like I got into beer because I drank a lot in corporate. And the problems that I had in corporate, I still had in beer. And I think that we have this ability to talk about it in a way that isn't so high level. Like, stop talking about diversity as this giant Goodyear blimp that no one can reach, and start talking about the things that people on the ground can literally do to like change their little patch of grass, and like, how do you improve it? And that's why I love talking about it, because people don't think about it that way.
I want to go back to an icebreaker idea then, because in thinking about it in terms of how scary it might be and difficult for conversations, it's often, we as media enter those conversations having to break down that wall a little bit of what is a sensitive sometimes and scary conversation too. So let's jump back to icebreakers real quick. It's different because people come to you because they'll ask you pointed specific questions that they're seeking answers to. But just in starting those conversations and just beginning that back and forth, is there a good way to maybe ease into those kinds of chats?
Yeah, I think again, just it's I've read your bio and I'm really interested in this piece, or how did you get to beer? Like, what was it that you were doing? I mean, I love talking about those pieces and I never talk about them. Like, I'm old, and so it's like I have 20 years of work that I don't talk about, and 9-10 years of beer, and I like drawing the connection because I feel that people who read the articles who aren't into beer can understand if I'm like, oh, well, the corporate way of life was this, which happens here too. And I don't know. I mean, I worked real hard to be the man in an office for years. And I don't know why I love talking about it, but I do. And so it's just kind of the background of like, what was I thinking about before I got to this point? Because it really didn't wake up and be like, diversity and inclusion is big. Like, it was kind of like always there.
What was one of the challenges that you faced in terms of making that transition to follow this path?
I think the big piece was I didn't know I could be in beer. I, as a Black woman, I didn't really know craft for a very long time, and we've got some beer that says it's craft, and it's like Alexander Keith says it's an IPA, and if you ever come here, I will buy it for you, and you will laugh and you will laugh and you will laugh because it's a lager, and that's what I used to drink. And I was like, I drink IPAs, boom. And then I had a real IPA, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And I think that learning about you can make something different, and that was kind of that first piece that it was like, oh, there's something out there. But I mean, I was in my 30s before I figured out that craft beer was a thing that I could join, and and I think that that's this piece that's still there, that there are groups of people who don't know that they can be part of this.
I want to just give a heads up to people. I'll turn to some submitted questions soon. But again, if you've got a question that you want to ask, I will open it up to the group as well as you can put it in the chat box. Ren, there is something that came through from Dr. J's Crafted for All newsletter just recently, highlighting the 3 C's of inclusive, equitable, and just storytelling. Those 3 C's: confidence, competence, and credibility. Confidence, do you feel confident speaking about the topics related to cultural identity and justices? Competence, do you have the competence to intelligently and gracefully engage with conversations? Credibility, have you been granted the credibility by others to speak and engage with those things? Kate sent this along to me with a great question, asking about how these things can relate to journalism. When we think about confidence and competence and entering areas where we might not be, and often it's literally our job to learn about those things too, how we can build on this idea of what those confidence, competence, and credibility are as storytellers to be better when it comes to that kind of equitable storytelling.
Yeah, I think that, the credibility, like when you're approaching someone for the story, like you won't necessarily have your full outline because that conversation with the person is going to kind of shape it, but have an idea. Don't be like, I have no idea what's going to happen with this. Tell me that you have an idea for an article. Tell me that you have a pitch that you're working on and that's what you want to do, because people have done that before. And I'm like, yep, cool. I love the idea that, what you're working on. And they'll say it may not go anywhere for a while, but I'm really passionate about it. And this is a thing that I would really like to work on. So it's, it's leading back into that and saying that I will follow up with you and let you know where it ends up. Because like you're interviewing me and suddenly you've written an article that has just disappeared. So keeping that person kind of in the loop. I mean, it's not like say, oh, it'd be 2 weeks from now, but just, hey, like, here's an article, or you know what, it didn't go anywhere. I'm going to put it on my blog, or I'm going to post it somewhere else. Here it is. And just because then I'll trust you. Like when you come back with something and saying, I actually have the assignment to do this, I'm on the phone, I'm on whatever, you got me.
So yeah, we very often talk about pitches, what makes a good pitch, what might excite editors. From the perspective of someone who's sought after to be interviewed, what is it about these kinds of pitch ideas that get you excited? When someone presents you with the information you're talking about, what is it that gets you over the hump?
Sometimes it's just the person. I've been pretty lucky that, someone will just send me a really great message and I'm like, I love everything about you. So yeah, look. Or I've seen your stuff somewhere and unbeknownst to you, I've been reading it and I'm like, hell yeah, like let's go. I think too, again, the like I've done a little bit of homework about you and I think that you will fit in this. You may not make it in the end, but I would like to engage with you. If you, just be honest and upfront, because I know that it won't always happen, but like tell me, because don't leave it for me to assume on my own.
I want to turn to a question that we had submitted from Ashley. And Ashley had asked, how can we shift from a statistics-based focus on diversity to more action-based inclusion?
In Canada, we don't do a lot of statistics. So over here, this is the point where we're too polite. And I always say, like we don't ask who are you and who are your people. We've based a lot of it on anecdotal, and we're trying to get into that statistic. So it's almost the opposite over here. But yeah, I think asking for action items in ways of what are people can do quickly, and what are things that people can educate themselves on, and what's kind of the like long-term education or things that people can do. Because I'll give quick things, right? Because people always think like, if I'm going to do inclusion, it's going to cost me a lot of money. And it's like, no, change your pronouns, add your pronouns on your Zoom profile, add your pronouns into your email signature. Like, everyone can do it. It's 30 seconds to do. And that's how you show that you want to have inclusion within whatever area you're in. So I kind of do it that it's like, it doesn't have to cost you anything but time.
Uh, is is it easy to build trust when you say, half jokingly, statistics don't exist? Where that can be an important part of building some background and understanding. So when things kind of live more so in anecdotal and qualitative, is it easy to build trust in this way without maybe often to get the giveaway?
No, and I think like we're starting to work on it. Like we have the Canadian Craft Brewers Association, which Dr. J is also working with, and they're doing a survey, which is like coming out. I think it went out yesterday. And so for the first time ever, they're sending information out, questions to breweries to be like, we actually need to stop doing anecdotal talks about things. When I was a sales rep, someone went digging for info to see if I was the only woman of color, and in the end, he was like, "You're the only one I can find." So like, I think that for Ontario, which is a very large province. And so I'm like, great, but like, I don't know if it's true because it's anecdotal. Like, the information just did not exist. So we're finally catching up to say like, hey, we have to get this info. And the question too is, what do you do with the info? Like, why do you want it? And with that case, we want it to be able to say, okay, we thought we didn't have a lot of women of color, but it turns out in this area in the country, it's just, women of color running breweries, but we didn't know. And so I think that also helps people kind of like tailor their focus.
Samer, thank you for your question in the chat. For those who hadn't seen, Samer asked, when preparing for your keynote speech and qualify there for a Queer Beer Fest, what was something you found challenging? What was something you found surprisingly easy?
Nothing is easy, ever. I also have short-term memory loss. I had a really bad concussion about 10 years ago. And so I have key points that I always have to hit, and then I kind of tailor in between. I want to find a challenge, because if it's not challenging, I don't want to do it. Because if you're just like, meh, I'm gonna just do it, like, then I won't give people best. And I always, like, my rule is like, I have to feel nervous. And people are always like, don't be nervous. And it's like, no, I want to be nervous. Like, I want that adrenaline. I want that kick, because then it comes out. Right. And if it's easy, then I'm just going to be like, yo, what's up? I'm going to do the same thing I do all the time. And I don't think it's fair. And I don't think it's informative. And because information changes. So I think also part of the challenge is staying on top of what's happening. Because, again, I'm a kid of the 80s and language has changed, and like making sure that if I make a mistake, I apologize and I learn from that. And that way I tailor what happens going forward. So the challenge is just to stay educated and aware of what's happening. But yeah, it's never easy.
For those of us who also get nervous, why is it that being nervous is good for you?
I used to be a wedding photographer. I just like those nerves, like, they make you laser focus on things, and then you pay attention to what you really get out there and what you want to capture. And I just, yeah, I don't love being nervous, like, at all, but I love it at the start of a talk, because the nerves will go away, but it's that first little like,
We're at the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to do a quick check, because I think two big things that I'm hearing from you, Ren. One, be human. That seems to be kind of this underlying current of whether it's, reaching out to talk to you for a story, the way that we interact with people in interviews, or the way that we approach storytelling. Just making sure we acknowledge the humanity, the difficulties of it all is a key part. But then also just to, like, I think the second half of that is what you were just saying, this leaning into both the unknown and how that can be a beneficial thing for us, that, we're meant to try to explore what these things are. So pretending like you have the answers might just make things harder in the end.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to a question that we had submitted from Sal. And Sal was curious in any examples as to how diversity in breweries have benefited innovative approaches to the creation of new products. So this is one of those example questions.
Yes.
Have you seen that? Have you seen that connection?
Yeah, I mean, take any tropical fruit beer and, like papaya and mango and like, you're talking to people who grew with it and they're seeing like, oh, you can put that in a beer. And I think that also just if who are you talking to create beers and who are you working with? And I'm seeing a lot more collections with like non-beer people, and they're saying, we're talking to our communities and we're bringing them in and we're being influenced by their food and doing all of these different things. Like, I think of like Seventh Son and what they do with their like food pop-ups, and they're highlighting that it's like, it's people of color, but they're the people in the community. And like they already go to their restaurants, and now they're bringing it to people who wouldn't necessarily know about it and are giving them a platform again where they wouldn't necessarily have it. So I don't think it's just the innovation of product in terms of beer. I think it's in the innovation in terms of what breweries are talking about and what they're highlighting.
When it comes to this makes my mind connect to when it comes to storytelling and reporting, that identifying and understanding a community may be just as important as looking at an individual beverage alcohol business as filling in these examples. But when talking about that, the example from a business side of things, so I'm going to flip it to the media side of things. Why is it important for us to not just think about a community as an individual business that we're seeking out, but the collective that exists there?
I think it's the multiple levels of representation. If you've taken this community and you've drilled it down to the community of one brewery, well, what are they interacting with outside of it? And I think sometimes the interesting story is what's outside their walls, and again how they're influenced by it and how they work with it or they don't work with it, because there are a lot of breweries who are like, yeah, we don't know our neighbors, we're just gonna make beer, and our neighbors complain about the smell of us brewing. Well, have you talked to them? No. It's whatever. And it's like, but you're not just in there. It's not this insular piece. But I think when you start looking outside of the building and looking at the community, the question is, how do you want to write? If you've 800 word limit, like you're not gonna be like, okay, they're in this community that do these things. But you might say they've tried different spice blends that they got from the local merchant down the street. It's this East Indian spice blend that they've learned about. Boom. And that's the extra connection to what's happening outside.
With companies that you've worked with, do you find that there's that kind of similar space where they might not take that approach as well, where they're looking introspectively but not thinking holistically about where they exist and the people that surround them?
Yeah, I think that for the ones who've had some issues or troubles, they're in the thick of things and they don't have time to kind of pop their head up and say, what's happening outside. If we have to fix this, and it's like, yeah, but you also have to fix what people see, and how are you updating and what are you putting out there. And I think that some of the problems that you'll see is that people wait until they have finished something before they give an update, and it's like, these are people you're trying to fix. You're never going to finish. And so it's kind of that notion of, if I'm talking to someone for an article or a quick little sound bite, like I might be like, this is what's currently happening, because it's never going to be perfect. And I think that that's the big change that they have to do, is just stick your head out of the hole and take a look around and see who's looking at you.
Yeah, also something I find really interesting to push on as a writer, where if we're talking to an owner or a brewer, that the assumption is that something has to be finalized, or there has
Yeah.
to be something that's complete in order to talk about it or feel comfortable talking about it, when in reality that kind of in between, in progress, often ends up being the most interesting space to discuss.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah,
there
because that also leads to the next pieces, right? Like that's your follow up, and that's hey, you started talking about this thing, like maybe we'll check in 6 months and see like where it's gone to.
I want to ask, I want to go back to something you had mentioned earlier, just because I keep like that people are scared to talk about this. And I feel like that is a real poignant space where that kind of fear can creep in really, really well. Are are there spaces where, or specific kinds of questions where you feel like you've had to work harder to draw things out of people in the past when it comes to talking about these kinds of hard subjects?
Yeah, I think that we all think that we're good people, and it's really hard to have someone be like, "You're terrible and you've messed this up." And I think that getting people to understand what the problem was and who's affected. Like, I mean, think of any brewery that's had a huge amount of trouble. There's always someone who puts out a statement saying these people can't hack it. They're just bitter. This is like it's all on them, and it's like it's a lot of people saying that there's a problem, and I think that they're scared to say, yeah, we messed up. Like, you know what? It's a two-way street. Maybe some of it was this person, but like a lot of people are saying it's us. So we think it could be us. So we got to go back and take a look and figure some stuff out. But it's scary to say that, right? Like how often do you say, sorry, I was wrong?
How often does the idea of forgiveness come into what you talk about with people?
I think that it's the actions have to be such that forgiveness is possible. I don't think you can say I did this piece and I hope everyone forgives me. You have to keep going and understand that this is now a kind of forever thing. I think that like look at founders doing Black is Beautiful last year. It's because one person forgave them, and now they're like, and everyone's like, no, dudes, like we're not cool. And I think that it's forgiveness from some isn't forgiveness from all, and you have to understand that not everyone will love you at the end of it, but you also have to keep working to keep it. I mean, it's like it's pride, right? And everyone calls themselves an ally, and it's like you can't call yourself an ally. The community that you're interacting with, they have to call you that, and if you mess up bad, guess what? You lose the title. And it's that same notion of forgiveness, that I can forgive you at this moment, but if you keep doing it, I ain't forgiving you no more. Like that's it, we're done.
Jason, I apologize because I may have stepped a little bit on the question that you put in the chat box. So I'm going to read that now. Thank you, Jason. Jason, you asked for breweries that have been called out for something. Insert an accusation. Do you believe they should have the opportunity for redemption? So we'll pause right there because that may be something of a continuation of what you were just talking about. Should they have the opportunity for redemption, or is it that kind of explaining and showing learning that you're just talking about? That's what needs to take place.
I think some of the question too is what did they do?
Hmm.
Like what is it that is asking for the redemption? There's a brewery out here, like half hour from my place, where one of the owners was accused of abusing his long-term girlfriend. And instead of having full redemption, they kind of did a like, sorry, it happened. Like our lawyers made us write this. I never believed them from that point on, and done an international women's beer, but they've never done anything after to show they're taking the steps toward real redemption. And that guy, like they said, he doesn't work there, but he's building all the time. So like, it's the how bad was the transgression? Was it something that could be fixed? And it was we've learned from this and we've brought people in to help, and the person who's done it is no longer here, and we've brought in counselors or whatever. And then sometimes it's just like, you know what? It's one strike and you're out.
Are we at fault in the media if we wrote stories about Black is Beautiful but didn't do follow-ups on them about what came after?
I don't know. I think that everything is moving so quickly, and that it's again, some places did it really right and some places didn't. And there's stories of brewers who've donated like tens of thousands of dollars and then did the next step of learning even more. I think that I always looked at the Black is Beautiful brew as the stand, and what you did after was the action. And I think that it's one of those things where it's like we can keep talking about it, but again, what do you want to get out of it if you keep talking about it? Like, what are you gonna say? Like, yeah, they made another one and there's some money. Like, where's the interest, and where's the piece that continues with it?
I'm going to pause for a second in case anybody else would like to jump in to ask a question. I've got some others to ask, but if you'd like to chime in and ask something of Ren, please feel free. I will take that as no thank you, but you're welcome to ping me if you would. Instead, Ren, I'm going to jump to a question that Kate had shared. Kate wanted to know if there were effective ways you've seen reporters cover diversity, equity, inclusion that aren't just a straightforward story of this person is the diversity, equity, inclusion champion at the brewery.
Yeah, I think I've seen where people talk to those who are um, learning from that person and kind of the like, hey, what did you take away from it? And like, how are you changing? Because the consultant's always going to be the same. We're always going to tell you the same stuff, but it's the success and the like, hey, did we make any changes? And if we did, like, what were those changes? What did you do? You probably are really proud of some stuff, and you've probably got these like, I did not know this moment, and now I know, and we're going to focus on this, and here's where we're going with it.
Who are the best people to talk to at breweries or other beverage alcohol companies about these things? Because so often, it's the owners or we're pointed toward the owners, but it's stuff that impacts everybody else. Who should we be looking at?
I'm always like, don't talk to owners. They're never going to tell you, like, I did not know this, and now I learned a thing. Whatever. They're like, I knew that all along. I was waiting for someone to just, confirm it. I think people who interact with other people, so front of house, if the issue is in the brew house, talk to those people, talk to the cellarman. I don't think going after if there is a small portion of diversity, like don't go to people. Don't go to the one Black person who works there and is like, hey, how is it? They're gonna be like, it's great. If I blink twice, I'm in trouble. I think that talking to those who would actually benefit from the education and the like moving forward, because no one talks to them, but they are the people who represent everything that's happening around them.
What have you heard from those conversations when you talk to staff in those positions?
I think that they want to be heard, and some of it is, hey, we were trying to do this, and now that it's been said on this large scale, or again, we didn't know, so now we're taking these extra courses and we're feeling empowered, and we've created these committees and we've pushed for them, and now we're holding ownership accountable, and having this, instead of them telling us, we're saying this is what we need, and this is what we found, and this is what we want to talk about. Happening at a lot of places like that's a major shift that is happening. And I think that it's, you talk to the new person, you talk to the person who's been there for 10 years.
Perhaps tied a little bit to that, there was a question that Julie had submitted, and Julie was curious from the business perspective of an allied trade partner. Julie asked, what can I do to make my services for craft breweries more accessible and inclusive to all?
Julie. I think that some of it too is just stating values. What is it that you believe in, that you want with that partnership? It's just, here's what we believe in, and we would really love if you believed in some of that too. And if you are unfortunate enough to have an issue, what is your plan? And what is your real action plan going to be? Because if it's, we shrugged our shoulders and we're not doing anything, I can't work with you anymore, or I can't do and I can't talk about you. And I think that, again, that culture of accountability is so important, that if you are living it and saying, this is what I believe in and this is how I want to be perceived, you're not going to stick around with a place that is the complete polar opposite to you.
What are we missing with accessibility? Because I think so often we talk about backgrounds as it relates to gender identity or race and ethnicity, but not accessibility.
Accessibility is always the last thought. It's, I talk to people and they say, well, we have 2 stairs and we can't do anything about it. And it's like, if you're disabled, it doesn't mean using a wheelchair. It can be that you're using a cane. It can be that it's an invisible disability. It's, like autism, and like there's so many pieces, and people are just like, you must be using a wheelchair. That's accessibility. Boom. And it's like, there's a lot more. I mean, I used to drink with a guy who's, vision impaired, and he got just fine because the places we went to made it accessible. And the question is, how do you do that? And again, people say, well, I got to spend all this money. And it's like, just do a quick audit. It may not be about spending money.
Are there cues that, so if we walk into a bar or a restaurant or a tap room now that we can, are there cues that we as, whether it's drinkers for work as a reporter, that we could maybe try to pay closer attention to? whether it's related to accessibility or not, that's certainly an easy one where we can think about it. But how do we be proactive, just kind of like identifying the space and how these things can be a part of all this, what you're talking about?
I think more places are making statements. So again, they're like, "Hey, we don't tolerate these things." The question of, do they have pride flags in the window? Do they have that this is a safe space? Again, setting the expectation, and that becomes the accountability. Like, if you're going to put that in the window, well, guess what? You got to live up to it. And I think that those are easy things to see, and just again, like, what's the inclusive language that's used? If it's a mixed table, if we're all sitting at a table together and the server walks up and is like, "Hey guys," like, those are things we're trying to change, and so that you're going to notice, and just to see, like, how much do they care, and how are they talking about things, and do they say to Kate and I, like, "Oh, we've got this really great fruit beer." It's like, awesome. Like, you've already lost my business, because that's what you're going, that's what you're starting with, or and just the interactions are, and I mean, you can just feel the vibe.
There's a question from Holly, and Holly wanted to know about, I guess, group advocacy in a way. So Holly had asked, how can various underrepresented groups, so this could be women, BIPOC community, LGBTQ plus, how can these groups work together to help improve DEI across the board?
I think sometimes it's hard, because that's the emotional heavy lifting for those who are marginalized. And you're almost saying, like, yeah, you're in a bad position, but like, if you all get together, you can make it better. I think that that some of it, it's, not everyone's going to be comfortable, and they're not going to say, like, I know I should advocate for myself, but I just don't have the emotional strength for it. And I think that that's where that whole notion of an ally comes in. If you are an ally, you will see the scenario that's happening, and then someone else should be able to say, "Hey, like, can I talk to you about this? What do you need? Is it okay if I do this?" But I think it's almost unfair to say, "You're the marginalized group, you fix it," and that's how we go, right? Like, it's human nature. You're unhappy. What do you need to be happy? And I can tell surrounding you, like, this is why you're unhappy, and I can fix it. But instead, I'm making you vocalize what needs to be done.
Holly followed up with that, asking if there are areas where it would be more effective for groups to advocate for themselves versus looking at it from a big tent approach. Are there areas that come to mind?
I mean, again, it happens, like, with issues that have happened. The BrewDog indie, where the employees got let go on International Women's Day. Like, they were brought it forward. They were able to, like, get people behind them. So they brought out the initial issue, but then kind of were like, "We need all of you to back us up and to, like, help out," because it gets exhausting. That those folks been tirelessly working just to, like, be heard and taken seriously, and then to ask them to be like, "All right, lead the parade, let's go." Like, and I think that what was successful about it was that enough people came behind them.
I'll do one last call just in case anybody has a question that they would like to ask of Ren. Going once. Okay, Ren, I'll finish this with one question, because obviously we've talked so much about your expertise and insight, but as things kind of the world reopens in a way for us, I am curious about stories that you'd like to see. This does not have to be specific to diversity inclusion, but just so much stories that maybe have kind of caught your eye that you feel like would be exciting or interesting to explore, things that maybe aren't being told.
Immediately, I think of Black and Soul, and I think of Tony and April, and I think of what they're doing, and how hard they're pushing, and they're not at the table. And I think that it's almost like we've said, we just need these Black people, we just need these people, we just need, like, and we've kind of cherry picked who we need, and I think that changing it up a bit and getting someone like that. I mean, we don't talk about the Black, queer, and trans experience in beer, and I think that needs to happen, and really highlighting them, and what they're talking about. Like, I mean, I'm super biased, I love them both, but I think that those kind of stories, because right now it's either you're talking to me and I'm like the fixer or whatever you want to call me, or Dr. J, who's like working super hard, but there are people in between who we're not highlighting. And I mean, we can only do so much as each person, and we're doing our things, but like, yeah, getting a couple more people in there and letting them tell a story that only they can really tell, that they have been putting out there already, but it's not getting to the audiences that it should get to.
A couple of big takeaways I'm hearing. So again, being human for everybody, and two, I think the last 20 minutes or so, Ren, hearing you talk about the stories and people that exist in the middle that so often gets overlooked, sounds like that's kind of this next area where storytelling can be really ripe, and these are important stories to tell too.
Yeah, I mean, because also those people in the middle are the ones who end up leaving.
Mm.
And it's the question of why are you leaving and what's your experience and what was your takeaway? And because they go from spot to spot to spot. And I think that, they take little nuggets of knowledge that we're not sharing, and it's not out there.
Well, Ren, thank you so much for being with us tonight, answering all these questions and sharing some really great insight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for joining. We will have this and many more events coming up your way. Thanks a lot, Ren. Take care. Be well.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good one.